Hello, friends, and welcome to the Williamsburg Botanical Gardens. I thought we would come and read a story in a little bit of a different location. Words, I can't talk today. So let's just get right into the story. Today's story is called The Gift of the Little Folk. A tailor and a goldsmith were traveling together, and one evening after the sun had set behind the mountains, they heard the sound of distant music, which became more and more distinct. The music sounded unusual, but so charming that they forgot all about how tired they were and rushed forward. The moon had already risen by the time they had reached a hill on which they glimpsed a crowd of little men and women holding hands and dancing joyfully round and round. As they danced, they sang a lovely tune, and this was the music that the travelers had heard. In the middle of the circle sat an old man who was somewhat larger than the rest. He wore a brightly colored coat, and a whitish-gray beard hung over his chest. The two travelers, who were stunned, stood still and watched the dance. The old man motioned to them to enter the circle, and the little folk willingly let them enter. The goldsmith, who had a hump and, like all hunchbacks, was sassy enough, moved into the ring. At first the tailor was afraid and held himself back. However, when he saw how merry everything was, he mustered up his courage and followed the goldsmith. Just as he did this, the circle closed again, and the little folk continued to sing and dance with the wildest leaps. Meanwhile, the old man took a huge knife which hung on his belt, whetted it, and when it was sufficiently sharpened, he looked around at the strangers. They were frightened, but they did not have any time to reflect. The old man grabbed the goldsmith and, quick as lightning, shaved the hair on his head and his beard clean off. Right after this, the same thing happened to the tailor. Yet their fear vanished when the old man, after his work had been completed, slapped them both on the shoulder in a friendly way, as if he wanted to say that they had conducted themselves well by letting this happen to them willingly and without putting up a struggle. Then he pointed to a heap of coal that lay to one side, and indicated to the travelers through gestures that they should fill their pockets with it. Both obeyed, although they did not know what use the coal would be to them. They then continued on their way and sought shelter for the night. By the time they arrived in the valley, the clock of the neighboring cloister was striking 12. The music from the hill stopped abruptly. Everything vanished, and the hill stood alone in the moonlight. The two travelers found an inn and covered themselves with their coats on their bed made of straw. They were so tired, however, that they forgot to take the coal out of their pockets. When they wakened earlier than usual by a heavy weight on their limbs, they reached into their pockets and could not believe their eyes. The pockets were not filled with coal, but with gold. I lost my place. Moreover, much of their happiness, they found the hair on their heads and their beards fully restored. They were now rich people. But the goldsmith had filled his pockets more thoroughly than the tailor, in keeping with his greedy disposition, and possessed twice as much as his companion. Once a greedy man has a great deal, he demands even more. So the goldsmith proposed to the tailor that they spend another day in the region, and in the evening go out again to fetch even greater treasures from the old man on the hill. The tailor refused and said, "I have enough and am satisfied. Now I can become a master tailor. I'll marry my darling and be a happy man." Nevertheless, to please the goldsmith, he agreed to remain another day. In the evening, the goldsmith hung a few more bags over his shoulder in order to pack away as much as he could, and set out for the hill. As on the previous night, he found the little folk singing and dancing. Once again, the old man shaved him clean, and indicated to him to take some coal with him. The goldsmith did not hesitate to stuff his pockets with whatever they could carry. He returned to the inn and covered himself with his coat. "Even if the gold weighs me down," he said, "I'll gladly bear it." Finally, he fell asleep with a sweet feeling that he would awake the next morning as rich as a king. When he opened his eyes, he stood up quickly to examine his pockets, but he was astonished because he pulled out nothing but pieces of black coal. No matter how often he reached into his pockets, it was always the same. "I still have the gold that I won the night before," he thought, and he went to get it, but he was horrified to see that it had also turned to coal once again. As he hit himself on his forehead with his dusty black hand, he felt that his entire head had become smooth and bald, and his chin as well. But his distress was not over yet. Just then, he became aware of a second hump that had grown on his chest and was much larger than the one on his back. He then recognized that he had been punished for his greed and began to weep loudly. The good tailor, who was awakened by all this, consoled his unhappy companion as best he could and said, "Since you have been my comrade during our travels, I want you to stay with me and share my treasure." He kept his word, but the poor goldsmith had to carry the 2 humps for the rest of his life, and he wore a cap to cover his bald head. It's definitely more on the end of the morality tales, like warnings against greed. Interesting. I don't know how I feel about that story, to be honest with you. I'm gonna have to think about it. And let me know what you think of the story in the comments. And for now, it is time for your next adventure. I'll miss you. Cheers.